17 doctors surrounded the hospital bed, their faces etched with the kind of frustration that comes from watching someone die and having absolutely no idea why. Officer Maya Chen, 29 years old, the youngest decorated patrol officer in Dallas Police Department history, lay unconscious while the finest medical minds in Texas stood helpless. This is the story of how a convicted felon saved a cop's life, and how one case changed everything about the way we think about knowledge, redemption, and who gets to be called a hero. But before we dive in, hit that subscribe button. These stories take hours of research and writing to bring you, and your support keeps them coming. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and let's get into this unbelievable, true story. Maya Chen wasn't supposed to end up like this. Iron Maya, they called her at the precinct. 3 commendations for bravery before she turned 30. The kind of cop who ran toward danger while everyone else was running away. She'd talked down armed suspects, pulled civilians from burning vehicles, faced down situations that would make veteran officers think twice. Nothing rattled Maya Chen until 6:23 on a Tuesday morning, when her partner, Officer Jessica Rodriguez, found her convulsing on the cold tile floor of the women's locker room at Dallas Metro Police Station. Blood was streaming from Maya's nose. Her body jerked violently, limbs flailing against the metal lockers with sickening thuds. Jessica dropped to her knees, immediately calling for an ambulance while trying to keep Maya from injuring herself further. Maya, can you hear me?" Jessica shouted, but Maya's eyes had rolled back, showing only whites. Paramedics arrived within 4 minutes. Maya's vital signs were all over the place. Heart rate spiking to 180 beats per minute, then dropping to 40. Blood pressure swinging wildly. Temperature climbing to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. They rushed her to Dallas Metro Hospital, sirens screaming through the early morning traffic. Dr. Jennifer Costa was just finishing her night shift when the call came through. Chief of Emergency Medicine, 19 years of experience. She'd seen everything from gunshot wounds to exotic tropical diseases. But the moment she saw Maya's labs, she knew this was different. "Get me neurology, toxicology, hematology, and infectious disease," Dr. Costa ordered. "Page everyone. I don't care if they're off duty. We need all hands on deck." Within 2 hours, 17 specialists had assembled at Dallas Metro Hospital. Not just any specialists, the absolute best Texas had to offer. Dr. Robert Martinez, Chief of Neurology, trained at Johns Hopkins. Dr. Sarah Kim, toxicologist who'd consulted on cases for the FBI. Dr. Michael Stevens, hematologist who'd published 43 peer-reviewed papers. Priya Patel, infectious disease expert who'd worked with the CDC during multiple outbreaks. They ran every test in the medical playbook. CT scans of Maya's brain showed no trauma, no bleeding, no tumors. The images came back perfectly normal for a healthy 29-year-old woman. MRIs revealed nothing. Her brain structure was flawless. Blood panels tested for over 400 different substances: opioids, amphetamines, cocaine, synthetic drugs, prescription medications, heavy metals, organic toxins. Every single result came back either negative or inconclusive. Spinal taps ruled out meningitis and encephalitis. Genetic testing found no hereditary conditions. Autoimmune panels came back clean. Yet Maya continued to deteriorate before their eyes. Her seizures increased in frequency and intensity. Her organs began shutting down systematically. Kidney function dropped to 30%. Liver enzymes skyrocketed to levels that should have been impossible. Her heart developed irregular rhythms that made no medical sense. Patterns the cardiologist had literally never seen in 15 years of practice. This is impossible, Dr. Martinez said during the emergency conference on day 2. We have a previously healthy young woman with no medical history, no drug use, no toxic exposure we can identify. Yet she's experiencing multi-system organ failure. Dr. Kim reviewed the toxicology screens for the 3rd time. I've tested for everything. Industrial chemicals, agricultural pesticides, biological toxins, even rare poisons you'd only see in spy novels. Nothing. Her immune system is attacking something, Dr. Patel added. But we can't identify what. It's like she's fighting an invisible enemy. Meanwhile, the Dallas Police Department had launched its own investigation. Captain Richard Hayes personally took charge, convinced that someone had targeted Maya. She was too young, too healthy for this to be natural causes. Internal Affairs went through every case Maya had worked in the past year. Had she made enemies, arrested someone dangerous, testified against a violent criminal seeking revenge? They found nothing suspicious. Maya had been professional, by the book, respected by everyone. No threats, no complaints, no obvious motives for anyone to harm her. The FBI got involved, suspecting a targeted attack on law enforcement. They investigated potential terrorist connections, domestic extremist groups, anyone who might have access to exotic bioweapons. Still nothing. By day 3, Maya's prognosis had gone from critical to terminal. Dr. Costa gathered the family to discuss end-of-life care. Maya's parents, both teachers from Houston, couldn't comprehend what they were hearing. "You're telling us our daughter is dying. And you have no idea why?" Maya's father asked, his voice breaking. "We've done everything, Doctor." Costa replied, her own frustration evident. 17 specialists, hundreds of tests. This is beyond anything in our experience. 4 floors above the ICU, in the prison medical ward that occupied the upper level of Dallas Metro Hospital, an inmate named David Reeves sat in the common area watching the local news. The story of Officer Maya Chen's mysterious collapse had become headline news. The TV showed footage of the hospital, interviews with police officials, speculation about what could have caused such a sudden and devastating illness in a healthy young officer. David Reeves was 42 years old, serving year 6 of a 12-year sentence for manslaughter. 6 years ago, in a moment of devastating judgment, he'd gotten behind the wheel after drinking and killed a young mother in a car accident. The guilt haunted him every single day. But before his arrest, before his life fell apart, David had been an ER nurse for 15 years. He'd worked trauma centers in Houston, Austin, and Dallas. He'd seen gunshot wounds, drug overdoses, industrial accidents, chemical exposures. He'd developed an almost instinctive ability to recognize patterns that other medical professionals might miss. Prison hadn't dulled those instincts. If anything, his work helping fellow inmates with their medical issues had kept his skills sharp. As he listened to the news anchor describe Maya's symptoms, the seizures, the organ failure, the neurological decline, the mysterious elevated temperature, something clicked in David's mind. He'd seen this before. Twice, actually, during his years in emergency medicine. Cases that had initially stumped everyone, until someone thought to look in an unexpected direction. Nurse Williams, David called to the corrections officer who supervised the medical ward. Tanya Williams was one of the few staff members who treated inmates with genuine respect. She'd worked with David on several medical emergencies within the prison and had developed a grudging respect for his expertise. "What is it, Reeves?" "That police officer on the news. I think I know what's wrong with her." Tanya raised an eyebrow. "You think you know something that 17 doctors don't?" "I know how that sounds," David said, "but I've seen cases like this. The symptom pattern, it's not a disease or a poison you'd normally test for. It's something environmental, something the doctors wouldn't think to look for because it seems impossible given her occupation." Tanya studied him for a long moment. David had proven himself reliable over the years. When an inmate had a heart attack last year, David's quick intervention had saved his life. When another prisoner showed symptoms of appendicitis that the medical staff had initially dismissed, David's insistence on testing had prevented a fatal rupture. "What are you suggesting?" "I need to talk to someone from the hospital. Someone in authority who will listen. That officer is going to die if they don't figure this out in the next 24 hours. And I think I can help." Tanya made a decision that would change everything. She picked up her phone and called Dr. James Morrison, the physician who oversaw medical care for county inmates and maintained relationships with Dallas Metro Hospital staff. Dr. Morrison arrived at the prison ward 30 minutes later. He was skeptical, to say the least. A convicted felon claiming he could solve a case that had stumped the best medical minds in the state seemed absurd. But Dr. Morrison also knew David's background. He'd reviewed the inmate's medical file when David first arrived at the facility. 15 years as an ER nurse. Excellent performance reviews. Multiple commendations for quick thinking during emergencies. "Talk to me," Dr. Morrison said, sitting across from David in the consultation room. David leaned forward, his expression intense. "The symptoms they're describing on the news, the seizures, the multi-organ failure, the neurological decline, the temperature fluctuations. It's not presenting like a typical poisoning. It's too systematic, too comprehensive. That pattern suggests chronic, low-level exposure to something that's been accumulating in her system over time." "They've tested for everything," Dr. Morrison countered. "Heavy metals, organic compounds, industrial chemicals." "Not everything," David said. "I'm betting they haven't specifically tested for carbon monoxide poisoning. Not acute carbon monoxide, but chronic exposure over weeks or months." Dr. Morrison frowned. Carbon monoxide would show up on blood tests. They'd see elevated carboxyhemoglobin levels. "Not if she's been away from the source for more than a few hours before testing," David explained. "Carbon monoxide has a half-life of about 5 hours in the bloodstream with normal oxygen levels. By the time she got to the hospital and they ran the tests, the CO itself would be mostly cleared from her system. But the cellular damage would remain and continue to cascade." "But where would a patrol officer be exposed to carbon monoxide at those levels?" David's answer was simple and devastating. "Her patrol car. Have you or someone you know ever experienced symptoms that doctors couldn't explain? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one." Dr. Morrison sat back in his chair, processing David's theory. A patrol car with a carbon monoxide leak. It seemed almost too simple, yet the more he thought about it, the more sense it made. "Walk me through your reasoning," Dr. Morrison said. David nodded. "I've seen 2 cases like this during my ER years. The first was a taxi driver in Houston who came in with similar symptoms: seizures, organ dysfunction, neurological problems. Took us 3 days to figure out his cab had a cracked exhaust manifold that was leaking CO into the passenger compartment. He'd been breathing it 8 to 10 hours a day for months." "And the second case?" "A woman who worked from home. Her home office was above an attached garage. Her husband would start his car every morning and let it warm up for 15 minutes. The carbon monoxide was seeping through the floor. By the time we diagnosed it, she had permanent brain damage." Dr. Morrison pulled out his phone. "The symptom presentation matches chronic CO poisoning perfectly," David confirmed. "Chronic exposure doesn't present like acute poisoning. Instead of the classic cherry red skin and headaches, you get progressive neurological damage, cardiac arrhythmias, organ failure. The CO binds to hemoglobin more effectively than oxygen, starving cells throughout the body. Over time, it causes cellular death in multiple organ systems simultaneously. But they would have tested her blood oxygen levels. Standard pulse oximetry can't distinguish between oxyhemoglobin and carboxyhemoglobin, David explained. It would show normal oxygen saturation even if a significant percentage of her hemoglobin was bound to carbon monoxide. They'd need a specific co-oximetry test, and they'd need to do it while she still had CO in her system. Dr. Morrison was already dialing. Even if you're right, she's been in the hospital for 3 days. The CO would be long gone, but the cellular damage pattern would still be visible if they know what to look for, David insisted. Elevated lactate levels from cellular hypoxia, specific enzyme markers, and most importantly, they need to inspect her patrol car immediately. If there's an exhaust leak, it'll still be there. The call connected. Dr. Morrison was speaking with Dr. Jennifer Costa. Dr. Costa, this is James Morrison from County Medical Services. I know this is unusual, but I have information about Officer Chen's case that might be relevant. There was a pause. Dr. Costa's voice came through, exhausted and desperate. At this point, I'll listen to anything. We're out of options. Have you specifically tested for carbon monoxide poisoning? Not just standard oxygen levels, but actual co-oximetry? Another pause. We did standard blood gases. Her oxygen saturation appeared normal. Why would we suspect CO poisoning? Because the symptom pattern is consistent with chronic low-level exposure. And there's a potential source, her patrol vehicle. If there's an exhaust system malfunction, she could have been exposed for weeks or months without realizing it. Dr. Costa was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, sharpened with possibility. Chronic CO exposure would explain the multi-system failure, the neurological symptoms, the cardiac issues. My God, why didn't we think of this? Because you were looking for acute causes, Dr. Morrison said. This is insidious, progressive. By the time she collapsed, the damage was already extensive. We need to test her immediately. Even if the CO is gone, there should be metabolic markers, elevated myoglobin, troponin levels, lactate acidosis. Dr. Costa was already shouting orders in the background. And someone needs to inspect her patrol car right now. Morrison hesitated. Dr. Costa, I should mention that this theory came from a consultation with someone who has extensive ER experience. I don't care if it came from a janitor, Dr. Costa replied. If it saves Officer Chen's life, I'll take medical advice from anyone. Thank you, Dr. Morrison. The call ended. Dr. Morrison looked at David with a mixture of respect and disbelief. If you're right about this. I am right, David said quietly. I've seen this pattern before. I just hope we're not too late. Within 30 minutes, Dallas Metro Hospital's toxicology lab was running specialized tests for carbon monoxide metabolites. They were looking for specific cellular damage patterns, enzyme disruptions that would indicate prolonged hypoxia, microscopic indicators that standard testing had missed. Simultaneously, Captain Hayes ordered Maya's patrol car, Unit 247, to be brought to the police garage immediately. The vehicle had been sitting in the station parking lot since Maya's collapse, untouched, waiting for forensic analysis that no one had thought necessary. Hazmat specialists arrived at the garage wearing detection equipment. They started the patrol car's engine and began testing for gas leaks. Within 5 minutes, their equipment was screaming. Carbon monoxide levels inside the vehicle's cabin were reaching dangerous levels, over 200 parts per million. The Environmental Protection Agency considers anything over 9 ppm to be hazardous with prolonged exposure. The hazmat team shut down the engine and immediately inspected the exhaust system. What they found was damning. The exhaust manifold had a crack that had been slowly widening over months. The leak was positioned directly beneath the vehicle's heating and air conditioning intake vent. Every time Maya turned on the climate control, which in Texas summer heat was basically always, she'd been pumping carbon monoxide directly into the cabin. The catalytic converter showed signs of deterioration that had made the problem worse, allowing higher concentrations of CO to form. The combination had turned Maya's patrol car into a mobile gas chamber. How long has this car been in service? The lead hazmat specialist asked Captain Hayes. Hayes checked the maintenance logs. His face went pale. 8 months. And according to this, it's been reporting intermittent engine problems for the last 3 months. Minor issues. Nothing that seemed urgent. Those minor issues were symptoms of the exhaust failure, the specialist said. This leak has been building for months. Anyone who spent significant time in this vehicle would have been exposed. Back at the hospital, the specialized test results were coming through. Dr. Kim, the toxicologist, burst into the ICU with printouts in hand. We found it. Elevated carboxyhemoglobin metabolites. Specific cellular enzyme patterns consistent with chronic CO exposure. Her mitochondrial function is severely compromised. Exactly what you'd see with prolonged oxygen deprivation at the cellular level. Dr. Costa immediately changed Maya's treatment protocol. High-flow oxygen therapy through a non-rebreather mask, pushing oxygen concentration to nearly 100%. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy was scheduled immediately. Maya would be placed in a pressurized chamber to force oxygen into her oxygen-starved tissues. They administered hydroxycobalamin, a medication that could help counteract some of the cellular damage. Supportive care for her organs. Medications to protect her brain from further hypoxic injury. The treatment began at 2:17 p.m. on Maya's 3rd day in the hospital. By 6:30 p.m., subtle changes began appearing. Maya's seizure activity decreased. Her heart rhythm stabilized slightly. Her brain activity on the EEG showed marginal improvement. By midnight, her kidney function had improved from 30% to 45%. Her liver enzymes, while still dangerously elevated, had stopped climbing. Dr. Martinez, the neurologist, reviewed the latest brain scans with cautious optimism. The swelling is decreasing. We're seeing improved blood flow to previously compromised areas. She's responding. The news spread through the hospital like wildfire. The mysterious case that had stumped 17 specialists finally had an answer. And the answer had come from the most unlikely source imaginable. Dr. Morrison returned to the prison ward that evening. David was reading a medical journal when the doctor entered. "You were right," Dr. Morrison said simply. "Carbon monoxide poisoning from her patrol car. She's responding to treatment." David closed his eyes briefly, relief washing over him. "How bad is the exposure?" David asked. "Months of it." The car had a cracked exhaust manifold feeding directly into the cabin ventilation. She'd been breathing CO every single day on patrol. "Will she recover fully?" David asked. "Too early to say. The cellular damage was extensive, but she's alive and she's improving." "Without your insight," Dr. Morrison trailed off, not needing to finish the sentence. David nodded slowly. How many other officers were driving similar vehicles? It was the right question. Captain Hayes was asking himself the same thing. The Dallas Police Department launched an immediate fleet-wide inspection. Every patrol vehicle, every unmarked car, every transport van, all of them needed to be tested for exhaust leaks and carbon monoxide exposure. The inspection revealed shocking results. 23 vehicles showed some level of exhaust system problems. 7 had leaks severe enough to pose immediate health risks. 4 of those 7 had been driven by officers who'd reported mysterious symptoms over the past months. chronic fatigue, headaches, difficulty concentrating, respiratory problems. Symptoms they'd attributed to stress, long hours, or minor illnesses. Symptoms that were actually low-level carbon monoxide poisoning. The case was expanding beyond just Maya Chen. This was a systemic problem that had been slowly poisoning Dallas police officers for months, possibly years. Dr. Morrison found himself in an unprecedented position. David's diagnostic insight had not only saved Maya's life, but had uncovered a department-wide safety crisis. Yet how could he properly credit an inmate serving time for manslaughter? The solution came through careful documentation. Dr. Morrison began recording David's contributions as consultations from an emergency medicine specialist with extensive field experience. Technically accurate, while avoiding the uncomfortable reality of the consultant's current address. Word of the breakthrough spread through medical channels. Other hospitals began reviewing their mysterious illness protocols, adding environmental exposure assessments. Dallas Metro Hospital developed new guidelines for considering occupational hazards in diagnostic workups. Dr. Costa herself implemented changes to the ER's standard operating procedures. Every mysterious neurological case would now include detailed environmental history. What's your occupation? What equipment do you use? How much time do you spend in vehicles? What chemicals are you exposed to? The question seemed obvious in hindsight. But hindsight is always clearer than the moment of crisis. Maya's recovery continued over the following weeks. The hyperbaric oxygen treatments helped repair cellular damage. Her organ functions gradually improved. The neurological symptoms slowly receded, though complete recovery would take months. She woke up on day 7, confused and disoriented but alive. Her parents were there, tears streaming down their faces as Maya squeezed her mother's hand and asked in a hoarse whisper what had happened. "You were poisoned," her mother said. "Your patrol car was poisoning you. But the doctors figured it out. You're going to be okay." Maya's partner, Jessica Rodriguez, visited daily. She brought updates from the precinct, told Maya how the entire department had been tested for CO exposure, how new safety protocols were being implemented. "They're calling you the department's canary in the coal mine," Jessica said with a sad smile. "You almost died, but you saved everyone else." What Jessica didn't mention, because she didn't know, was that a convicted felon in a cell 4 floors above had been the one who actually saved Maya's life. David continued his quiet work within the prison system. Dr. Morrison had begun sending him other difficult cases, inmates with mysterious symptoms, medical puzzles that standard protocols couldn't solve. David's success rate was remarkable. A diabetic inmate whose blood sugar management had been failing. David recognized the symptoms of a rare insulin allergy that required different medication. A prisoner complaining of chronic abdominal pain that doctors had dismissed as attention-seeking behavior. David identified the presentation of a slowly developing intestinal obstruction that required emergency surgery. An older inmate whose confusion and memory problems were attributed to dementia. David caught the subtle signs of a urinary tract infection that, in elderly patients, often presents as cognitive impairment, rather than typical urinary symptoms. Each case added to his growing, though carefully concealed, reputation. Nurse Williams and other correctional medical staff increasingly relied on David's assessments. His cell had become an unofficial diagnostic center, equipped with medical textbooks and journals that Dr. Morrison quietly provided. The arrangement violated conventional protocols, but produced undeniable results. Inmate healthcare improved dramatically. Mysterious symptoms were resolved faster. Lives were being saved by someone society had written off as having nothing more to contribute. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of Maya's case continued expanding. The vehicle manufacturer issued a nationwide recall after federal investigators found similar exhaust problems in patrol vehicles across multiple states. The defect had affected hundreds of law enforcement vehicles nationwide. Other police departments began implementing mandatory vehicle safety checks. Carbon monoxide detectors became standard equipment in patrol cars. Officers received training on recognizing symptoms of CO exposure. Maya's near-death experience was preventing similar tragedies across the entire country. And at the center of it all, unknown to almost everyone, was a man serving time for killing someone in a drunk driving accident, using his knowledge to save lives he would never meet. The irony wasn't lost on David. He'd taken a life through his reckless behavior. Now, from behind bars, he was saving lives through his medical expertise. It didn't balance the scales. Nothing could bring back the woman he'd killed. But it gave him purpose, a way to serve others, even within his constraints. Dr. Morrison's quarterly report to the county medical board highlighted improved diagnostic success rates and better health outcomes for inmates. The administrators noticed the positive statistics, but didn't question the methodology. Results mattered more than methods. The success created momentum for expanding the program. Other correctional facilities began inquiring about the Dallas model for inmate healthcare. The approach was quietly being replicated across Texas. By week 8, Maya had progressed enough to begin physical therapy. The carbon monoxide had affected her coordination and muscle strength. Simple tasks, like walking, required concentrated effort. But Maya approached rehabilitation with the same determination she'd shown throughout her police career. Her story had become local news, then national news. "Cop nearly killed by her own patrol car," ran the headlines. The coverage focused on the vehicle defect, the department's response, the medical team's persistence in solving the mystery. No one mentioned the inmate whose insight had cracked the case. That story remained hidden in confidential medical files and quiet conversations between Dr. Morrison and the few hospital staff who knew the truth. Would you trust medical advice from someone with a criminal record if they had the expertise to save a life? Where do you draw the line between someone's past and their present ability to help? Drop your honest thoughts below. 4 months after her collapse, Officer Maya Chen walked back into the Dallas Police Department headquarters. She moved carefully, still rebuilding strength and coordination. But she walked through those doors under her own power. The entire precinct erupted in applause. Officers lined the hallways, clapping, cheering, some openly crying. Maya had been one of their own, nearly lost to something none of them had understood. Her return represented more than personal triumph. It symbolized victory over an invisible enemy that could have claimed any of them. Captain Hayes met her in his office, gesturing for her to sit. "How are you feeling, Chen?" Captain Hayes inquired. "Like I got hit by a truck," Maya admitted. "But I'm alive. The doctors say I'll make a full recovery. It'll just take time. You've got all the time you need. We're putting you on light duty for the next 6 months, minimum. Desk work, training duties, community outreach. No patrol." Maya nodded, having expected as much. Then she asked the question that had been haunting her since she woke up in the hospital. How many others were exposed? Hayes pulled out a thick file. 23 vehicles had exhaust problems. 7 were severe enough to cause health issues. We identified 4 other officers who'd been showing symptoms: fatigue, headaches, respiratory issues. They're all in treatment now, because of you. We caught it before anyone else got as bad as you did. Because of me? Maya shook her head. I almost died, I didn't catch anything. But your case exposed the problem, Hayes insisted. The whole fleet has been inspected and repaired. We've implemented new safety protocols. Monthly vehicle checks, CO detectors in every patrol car, training for officers on recognizing exposure symptoms. Hell, departments across the country are adopting our new standards because of what happened to you. Maya absorbed this information. Her near-death experience had sparked changes that would protect thousands of officers nationwide. There was meaning in her suffering, purpose in her survival. What Maya didn't know, what she would never know, was that the medical breakthrough had come from David Reeves, an inmate serving time for manslaughter, watching the news from a prison cell 4 floors above where she'd been dying. The Dallas Police Department received commendations from the Texas Department of Public Safety for their swift response and comprehensive safety reforms. Captain Hayes accepted the awards on behalf of the department, praising the medical team at Dallas Metro Hospital for their persistence and innovative thinking. Dr. Costa and her team received recognition from the State Medical Association. The case was being written up in medical journals as an example of diagnostic challenges in environmental toxicology. Chronic carbon monoxide poisoning in law enforcement, a case study in occupational health hazards, would become required reading for emergency medicine residents. The paper detailed the symptom progression, the testing challenges, the breakthrough in diagnosis. It credited consultation with field emergency medicine specialists for the critical insight about vehicular CO exposure. David's name appeared nowhere in the publication. His contribution remained hidden behind professional language and institutional credibility, but the impact of his insight continued rippling outward through interconnected systems. The vehicle manufacturer faced federal investigations and ultimately recalled over 15,000 patrol vehicles nationwide. The defect in the exhaust manifold design affected multiple model years. The recall prevented countless cases of officer exposure and probable deaths. OSHA issued new guidelines for law enforcement vehicle safety. Federal regulations now required regular CO testing in all emergency vehicles, police cars, ambulances, fire trucks. Maya's case had exposed a vulnerability that extended beyond just one department or one manufacturer. Medical schools began incorporating her case into their curricula. Environmental medicine courses used it as a teaching example of how occupational hazards can masquerade as mysterious illnesses. Future doctors were learning to ask different questions, consider environmental factors, think beyond traditional diagnostic boundaries. The transformation extended to how emergency medicine approached unexplained neurological cases. Protocols now included detailed occupational histories. What vehicles do you operate? What's your daily exposure to enclosed spaces? Has your workplace equipment been recently serviced? Maya became an unwitting advocate for officer safety. She spoke at police academies, sharing her story, emphasizing the importance of vehicle maintenance and symptom awareness. Her message was simple. You can't protect the community if you don't protect yourself first. I thought I was invincible, Maya told a room of rookies at the Dallas Police Academy. Iron Maya, right? Nothing could touch me. But the thing that almost killed me wasn't a bullet or a violent suspect. It was my own patrol car. The equipment we trust with our lives every day. She paused, letting that sink in. Check your vehicles. Know the symptoms of CO exposure. Don't ignore headaches, or fatigue, or difficulty concentrating. Your life might depend on recognizing the warning signs. The rookies listened with the attention that comes from seeing someone who'd survived what they all feared. Not the dramatic dangers of police work, but the invisible threats no one talks about. Jessica Rodriguez had been promoted to detective, partly in recognition of her quick response during Maya's medical emergency. She visited Maya regularly during her recovery, bringing case files when Maya was cleared for limited work-from-home duties. "You know what's crazy?" Jessica said during one visit. "The doctor said if I'd found you even 15 minutes later, you probably would have died right there in the locker room. And if they hadn't figured out the CO poisoning when they did, the organ damage would have been irreversible." "Someone was looking out for me," Maya replied, not realizing how true that statement was. 4 floors above, where she'd been dying, in a prison cell, where society had sent him to pay for his crime, David Reeves had been watching over her without her knowledge. A guardian angel in an orange jumpsuit. David's life within the correctional system had found new purpose through his medical consultations. Dr. Morrison continued sending him complex cases, and David's success rate remained remarkable. A construction worker from another facility with respiratory symptoms that had stumped doctors. David recognized the pattern of silicosis from prolonged exposure to concrete dust without proper respiratory protection. Pacing, deliberate and methodical, allowing the concepts to land with your attention. A young inmate experiencing unexplained muscle weakness and cardiac issues, David identified the telltale signs of chronic energy drink consumption. The prisoner had been buying multiple cans daily from the commissary, creating dangerous levels of caffeine and other stimulants in his system. A corrections officer's family member with neurological symptoms. David spotted the presentation of Lyme disease that had been missed because the patient didn't remember a tick bite, and the doctor hadn't considered it without that history. Each successful diagnosis added to David's invisible legacy. His expertise was saving lives across Texas, transforming healthcare delivery in ways that no one outside a small circle of medical professionals would ever know. Nurse Williams, who had initially helped connect David with Dr. Morrison, had become one of his strongest advocates. She'd seen firsthand how his insights improved patient outcomes. During her performance review, she mentioned the value of David's medical consultations, carefully framing it as utilizing available expertise within the facility. Her supervisor, initially skeptical, couldn't argue with the results. Inmate healthcare costs had decreased. Emergency medical transfers had dropped by 30%. Health outcomes had improved across multiple metrics. The Dallas County jail system was quietly becoming a model for medical innovation, though the source of that innovation remained carefully concealed. Dr. Morrison's documentation continued protecting David's identity while spreading his influence. When other facilities requested information about Dallas County's improved healthcare protocols, Morrison shared the systematic approaches, detailed patient histories, environmental exposure assessments, occupational hazard considerations, without revealing that these innovations came from an inmate's insights. The model was being replicated across Texas, then beyond. Correctional facilities in Arizona, New Mexico, Louisiana, and Oklahoma began adopting similar protocols. David's diagnostic approach was transforming how prisons delivered healthcare throughout the Southwest. 1 year after Maya's collapse, Dallas Metro Hospital held a commemorative event. The emergency medicine department unveiled new protocols for mysterious illness investigations, all inspired by lessons learned from Maya's case. Dr. Costa spoke to assembled medical staff, researchers, and administrators. Officer Chen's case taught us that sometimes the most important diagnostic tool isn't advanced technology or specialized testing. It's asking the right questions. Where does the patient spend their time? What environments are they exposed to? What seems impossible but might actually be the answer? The audience applauded. They were celebrating medical innovation, diagnostic persistence, the triumph of systematic thinking over conventional assumptions. No one knew that the critical insight had come from someone they would never have consulted, someone whose expertise they would likely have dismissed based on his current circumstances. Maya attended the event, still walking with a slight limp, but otherwise recovered. She thanked the medical team personally, hugging Dr. Costa and shaking hands with the 17 specialists who worked to save her life. "I owe you my life," Maya told them. They accepted her gratitude, knowing they deserved it for their persistence and willingness to consider unconventional possibilities. But the complete truth, that their breakthrough came from a prisoner's insight, remained unspoken. David watched the news coverage from the prison common area. The story had made local news again. A one-year anniversary piece about the cop who survived mysterious poisoning and the medical team that solved the puzzle. He felt the familiar mix of satisfaction and melancholy. Satisfaction that Maya had fully recovered, that his insight had saved her life and prevented countless other exposures. Melancholy that his contribution would forever remain anonymous, that redemption through service didn't erase his past crime. But he'd made peace with anonymity. The work mattered more than recognition. The lives saved mattered more than credit taken. Thinking about what could have been, Nurse Williams asked, noticing David watching the news coverage. "Thinking about what is," David replied. "She's alive. She's back to work. That matters more than who gets the credit." Williams studied him for a moment. "You know, there's a theory in medicine about moral injury, the psychological wound from violating your own ethical code. You carry that from the accident, but you're healing it through this work, helping others, using your knowledge to prevent the kind of tragedy you caused." David nodded slowly. "It doesn't bring her back. The woman I killed, nothing can do that." "No," Williams agreed. "But it means her death wasn't completely meaningless. It led you here, to this work, to saving lives you never would have touched otherwise. That's not redemption exactly, but it's something." It was something. In a twisted way, his worst moment had prepared him for his best work. The guilt and isolation of prison had focused his mind, stripped away distractions, left him with nothing but his knowledge and his desire to help others. 2 years after Maya's case, Dr. Morrison presented a paper at a national correctional healthcare conference. The title was deliberately vague, "Leveraging Internal Expertise for Improved Diagnostic Outcomes in Correctional Medicine." The presentation detailed how Dallas County Jail had dramatically improved health outcomes by consulting with medically trained individuals within the facility population. Morrison was careful never to name David, never to specify exactly who was providing these remarkable insights. But the attendees got the message. Many correctional facilities housed inmates with medical backgrounds, former nurses, paramedics, even doctors who'd made mistakes or broken laws but retained valuable expertise. That knowledge was going unused, dismissed because of the individual's criminal status. Morrison's presentation challenged that waste. "We have an ethical obligation to provide the best possible care to people in custody," he argued. "If expertise exists within our facilities, regardless of its source, shouldn't we utilize it, especially when lives hang in the balance?" The paper sparked debate. Some administrators embraced the concept, seeing an opportunity to improve care while reducing costs. Others rejected it on principle, arguing that inmates shouldn't be placed in positions of authority or trust regarding medical decisions. The controversy itself spread the idea. Within 3 years, over 40 correctional facilities across 12 states had implemented programs to identify and utilize medical expertise among their inmate populations. David's model was becoming national policy. his influence expanding far beyond the single cop he'd saved from carbon monoxide poisoning. Maya, now fully recovered and promoted to detective, had no idea she'd been the catalyst for all of this. She worked cases, mentored younger officers, advocated for vehicle safety, and lived her life unaware of the debt she owed to a man whose name she'd never heard. She'd gotten married to her longtime boyfriend, a firefighter who'd proposed during her recovery. They'd bought a house in a quiet Dallas suburb. Life had moved forward, as it always does, the crisis gradually receding into memory. Sometimes she thought about how close she'd come to dying. If the doctors had been even a few hours slower in figuring out the CO poisoning, she would have suffered irreversible brain damage or death. How lucky she'd been that someone, somewhere, had thought to look beyond conventional explanations. She didn't know that someone was watching her wedding announcement in the newspaper from a prison cell, feeling satisfaction that she'd found happiness after he'd helped save her life. She didn't know that when she spoke at police academies about vehicle safety, her words were partly teaching knowledge that had originated from David's ER experience. She didn't know that the case study medical students read about her poisoning was built on diagnostic insights from a convicted felon. And perhaps that was how it should be. Sometimes the most valuable contributions come from people society has decided don't deserve recognition. Sometimes wisdom exists in places we've been taught not to look. Sometimes the person we'd least expect to help us holds the key to our survival. 3 years after her collapse, Maya participated in a documentary about occupational health hazards in law enforcement. The film featured her case prominently, using it to discuss the invisible dangers officers face beyond the obvious threats of violence. During her interview, Maya reflected on what the experience had taught her. I learned that strength isn't about being invincible. It's about being aware of your vulnerabilities. It's about accepting help when you need it. It's about recognizing that sometimes the answers come from unexpected places. She had no idea how profound that last statement was, how literally true in ways she couldn't imagine. The documentary aired nationally, reaching millions of viewers. It sparked conversations about officer safety, vehicle maintenance, environmental hazards in the workplace. Maya's near-death experience continued teaching lessons, preventing tragedies, saving lives. And in a prison cell in Dallas, David Reeves continued his quiet work, analyzing medical cases, providing insights, saving lives one consultation at a time. His sentence had 5 more years to run. After that, he'd face the challenge of rebuilding a life as a convicted felon with nursing credentials he might never be allowed to use professionally again. But for now, in this moment, he had purpose. He had the ability to help others despite his circumstances. He had proof that his knowledge still had value, that his expertise could serve humanity even from behind bars. Sometimes redemption doesn't look like freedom or forgiveness or public recognition. Sometimes it looks like sitting in a cell, reading medical journals, analyzing symptoms, and quietly saving the lives of people you'll never meet. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones whose names we never learn. Maya Chen lived because David Reeves refused to let professional boundaries and social status override his medical instincts. A cop and a convict, connected by circumstances neither would have chosen, together proving that knowledge transcends judgment and healing can come from the most unexpected sources. The system changed because one man spoke up when he could have stayed silent. Protocols evolved because expertise was valued over credentials. Lives were saved because someone looked past what society said mattered and focused on what actually did. And that, in the end, is the legacy that matters. Not the awards or recognition or public celebration, but the quiet truth that when it counted most, when a life hung in the balance, a man society had written off, proved he still had something valuable to offer the world. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about redemption, expertise, and where we find wisdom in our society, hit that subscribe button. These stories take days of research and hours of writing. Your support keeps them coming. Drop a comment and tell me what matters more, someone's credentials or their capability, their past mistakes or their present knowledge. Would you want to know if a convicted criminal had saved your life, or would you rather live in grateful ignorance? And here's the real question that should haunt all of us. How many other brilliant minds are sitting in cells right now, their expertise going unused, their knowledge dismissed because of mistakes they made years ago? How many solutions to impossible problems exist in places we've been taught not to look? Where are you watching from? What hidden brilliance exists in your community that society refuses to see? Let me know in the comments, because sometimes the most brilliant minds exist in the most unexpected places. Sometimes the person who saves your life is someone you'd never think to trust. Sometimes wisdom speaks from behind bars, and healing comes from hands society has tried to forget. The question isn't whether David Reeves deserved to be in prison. He'd taken a life through his reckless choices, and justice demanded accountability. The question is whether his knowledge deserved to die with his freedom. Maya Chen would say no. She's alive today because someone answered that question correctly. What's your answer?